You know, when I sit down to do these videos, before I look into anything, before I look anything up, copious notes, by the way, before I look anything up or whatever, usually when I sit down to do these videos, I already have a pretty good idea in my head of what I think about a particular team, right? And after I look into the teams and look the stuff up on the computer and actually do the video, sometimes my preconceived notions turn out to be right. Sometimes my preconceived notions are wrong. A team actually looks a little better than I thought they were. Maybe they look a little worse than I thought they were. And sometimes you sit down and research a team and you go, what's even the point? That's the case today with Missouri. Oh my God, they're in rough shape. Up today in the series of previews that I'm doing, the 2020 college football team preview and game-by-game predictions, the Missouri Tigers are up today, and there ain't much hope. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, hey, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Sometimes they're even watchable. I'm gonna be honest, this one likely won't be. This is a preview for the Missouri Tigers 2020 football season. I'm going to give you a game-by-game prediction. Big shout out to Dylan over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. He suggested this preview for Missouri. So Dylan, really appreciate you supporting the channel over on the Patreon page, and I hope you at least enjoy today's video. All right, today's Sunday morning. I hope you all had a great 4th of July yesterday. Got to do whatever it is you wanted to do, whether that's, you know, friends and family, swimming, the lake, boating, fishing, fireworks, cooking out, hot dogs, hamburgers. We did brisket and barbecue. Anyway, I hope you had a great time. Hope everybody stayed safe and happy 4th of July. Today's Sunday. That means the live shows start again tomorrow on Monday. That's right. Don't forget about the second channel, Uncle Lou on LouTube. That's where we do all the live shows. Now, I used to do them all here. Moved all the live shows to a second channel. Just search Uncle Lou on LouTube, or there's a link in the description of this video that'll take you to that channel. That's where all the live shows are. We do a morning show Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. And I do the night show, the college football call-in show, Uncle Lou After Dark, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 p.m. Eastern. All right, the Missouri Tigers 2020. I'm not very high on Missouri. I wasn't very high when I sat down to do this today. And after spending a couple hours looking into Missouri, I'm still not very high. It's going to be a rough season for Missouri, in my opinion. Of course, they fired their coach at the end of last season, Barry Odom, and they bring in this new guy, ELIAH. Was that ELIAH? Probably saying it wrong. ELIAH DRINKWITZ, who has a grand total of 1 year of head coaching experience, and that was last year at Appalachian State. Now, it was a great year. How great was it for App State last year? Well, they went 12-1. Finished in the top 20, which is the first time a Sun Belt team has accomplished that. They set a record in the Sun Belt Conference for 12 wins, right? Yeah, they did. And they beat 2 Power 5 teams, North Carolina and South Carolina, I believe it was. Yeah. App State was a good team. Here's the problem. They're probably better than Missouri. This is going to be, number one, a huge step up in competition, clearly, for Drinkwitz going from the Sun Belt to the SEC. I know he had the 2 Power 5 wins, but playing 2 a year, not the same as playing 8, 9, or 10 a year, depending on the schedule. And I honestly don't believe Missouri is as talented a team this year as App State was last year. I'm just telling you right off the rip here, I think it's going to be a very rough season for Drinkwitz year 1 at Missouri. Let's take a look at Missouri's recruiting, because I like to do this for every team. The last 4 recruiting cycles gives you a pretty good idea of the overall talent that a team is working with, right? I know you got players that stay for a 5th and sometimes even a 6th year. You got some players that leave after their 3rd year. You have players that transfer in, players that transfer out, injuries. I know all that, so it's not 100% accurate, but it's a pretty good overall representation of the amount of talent that a team is working with when you look at their last 4 recruiting classes. So, and you're going to see a theme here. 2020, the class that just ended, 51st in America. Not good. The worst news, 13th. In the SEC, next to last recruiting in the SEC last year. 2019, the 37th class, not terrible. Also, though, 13th in the SEC. 2018, 43rd ranked class, 13th in the SEC. And 2017, the 43rd ranked class again, also 13th in the SEC. You can almost forget the national rankings here. They're sort of irrelevant. They're all way out of the top 25. You look at the SEC, their ranking within the SEC, how they've recruited the last 4 years, next to last each of the last 4 recruiting cycles. You're not going to win very many games in the SEC recruiting 13th every single year within the SEC. It's just not going to happen. Recruiting is a bloodbath all over college football, but in the SEC in particular. You have teams like Tennessee and Florida who hover around the 9 to 10 mark nationally in recruiting, yet every single year that's 5th, 6th, or 7th in the SEC. The top 10 recruiting rankings are just loaded with SEC teams every single year, so it'll be finishing 13th within the SEC. Not a good sign in terms of winning a bunch of games anytime in the immediate future. Let's take a look at what Missouri did last year. It was a weird year for Missouri last year. Barry Odom was on the hot seat entering the season. It hadn't gone well for Missouri in his time there. In fact, if you take a look at the win totals going all the way back to 2015 for Mizzou, 5 wins in 15, 4 wins in 16, 7 wins in 17, 8 wins in 18, 6 wins last year, 2019, in what was a pretty weird season. They brought Kelly Bryant in the offseason to transfer from Clemson, and it didn't really work out. He struggled with injuries off and on throughout the year, and their offense was really never able to get going last year. They lost week 1 to Wyoming in sort of a shocking game, really. I don't think anybody saw that coming. But then they turned around and won their next 5 games in a row, and we're sitting there at 5-1. Well, then they lost their next 5 games, and we're sitting at 5-6. And then they closed out the regular season with a win against the worst team in the SEC and one of the worst teams in the Power 5, Arkansas, to finish at 6-6 in 2019. But of course, they had a bowl ban, so they didn't participate in bowl season, even though technically they qualified with a 6-6 record. So 5 wins, 4 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins, 6 wins, going back to 2015. It hasn't gone well since they lost Gary Pinkel. It seems like forever ago, and some people might not even remember, Missouri actually won the SEC East in back-to-back years back in, I believe it was it 11 and 12? No, it was 13 and 14, wasn't it? Anyway, it doesn't matter, but whatever it was, they won the SEC East a couple of years in a row. Seems like forever ago. They are miles away right now from mattering. During that 5-game losing streak that they had last year, they averaged 9 points per game. So when I say the offense was bad, it was epically bad, historically bad, biblically bad, hugely bad. Where were we? Oh, yeah. So you get rid of Barry Odom, who took over for Pinkel. You bring in DRINKWITZ. Now, I'm not here to tell you that DRINKWITZ can't be a good head coach in a Power 5. We just don't know. He's got 1 year coaching experience. It was at App State. It went well, but that's 1 year. And again, huge step up in competition. Sort of look at where he came from. He comes from the Gus Malzahn tree of coaching. He followed Gus Malzahn around for several years early in his career, both at Auburn and Arkansas State. I believe he spent some time at, I think, Boise State. And his offenses, or the teams that he's been a part of, the offenses have been good almost every single year. So the guy is a great offensive mind. There's no doubt about that. There's no questioning that. You look at what he was able to do at App State last year. I know it was just 1 year and they're a pretty talented team and it's just the Sun Belt, but still beat 2 Power 5 conferences. First Sun Belt team ever to get to 12 wins. First Sun Belt team ever to finish in the top 20. A really, really good year there at App State. Will it transition into the Power 5 and in particular the SEC? Maybe, but it ain't going to transition this year. Let's take a look at what Missouri is going to be working with this year on both sides of the ball. We're going to start with offense. Of course, they lose Kelly Bryant. He was a 1 year guy coming in as a transfer. So heading into the offseason, it looked like sort of a 4-way battle for the quarterback job there at Mizzou. The combination of Kelly Bryant leaving and a brand new coaching staff coming in sort of wiped the slate clean at the quarterback position. Of course, no spring practice, no real off-season program to speak of. And that's true for every team, not just Missouri. Really puts a damper and makes it that much more difficult, I think, for DRINKWITZ to pick a quarterback heading into the season. You could see multiple quarterbacks play for Missouri in the first couple of weeks. In fact, there's a lot of teams that you could see play multiple people at multiple positions until they sort of figure out who really is the best guy. There's a reason coaches love spring practice. There's a reason coaches love off-season conditioning and programs. It's because you get a chance to see these guys and sort of form opinions before the season starts. This is going to be the weirdest season in college football history, probably, and this is just one of the reasons why. But you take a look at who they have at quarterback I think they're probably going to end up going with the transfer from TCU, Shawn Robinson. He's the highest rated guy of any quarterback on the roster. He doesn't have a ton of experience, but he's very athletic. And Missouri's offensive line was not very good last year. They were okay in the beginning of the year, and it sort of fell apart the last half of the season. They ended up with one of the worst lines really in the SEC. And if you're going to have questions or issues at the offensive line position, it's a good idea to have an athletic, mobile quarterback who can move around and escape some pressure. You will get that if you decide to go with Shawn Robinson. And again, if I had to put my money on it right now, that's who I would go with week 1 at Mizzou. You also got Taylor Powell. He's been a career backup. He's been there for 3 or 4 years. He did get some playing time last year with Kelly Bryant's injury, but it didn't go well, really. He only completed 47% of his passes. You've got redshirt freshman Connor Bazelak. Is that right? He actually started, was it the last game against Arkansas maybe? Tore his ACL. So, recovery, he wasn't able, like we mentioned, to participate in spring. Probably wouldn't have been able to anyway. It would have been close with the ACL, but he would have been able to get an opportunity to be seen by the coaches in the offseason if we had one. He didn't. For those reasons, and for talent reasons, I think Shawn Robinson is going to be the guy at quarterback for Mizzou. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of different quarterbacks in the beginning of the year. When you look at the running back situation, that's probably the strength of Missouri's offense. Roundtree to third returns. He's had 700 or more yards in each of his first 3 seasons at Mizzou. And in fact, I think he had over 1,000 in 2018. Took a step back last year in 2019 with the offensive line issues and just a bad offense overall. But he's got some talent and some ability. You also have a junior that's sort of like a third down back, a scat back, one of these agile type juke running backs that can you hand him the ball 15 or 20 times a game? No, but you can bring him in on third down or passing situations, and he's great catching the ball out of the backfield. What's his name? Tyler Brody. He's got 44 career catches over his first 2 years at Mizzou. So I think those will be the 2 featured running backs for Mizzou, and I like that as sort of a 1-2 punch at running back. Again, I think that's probably the strongest position group when you look at Missouri's offense. Wide receivers, nothing but question marks and holes. You lose your top 3 wide receivers from last year, and even though Missouri hasn't been great over the last few years, they've had some pretty good wide receivers. They've had some pretty good tight ends. I'm not saying they don't have any good ones in 2020, but they don't have any that really have proven anything on the field yet. You lose your top 3 wide receivers, like I mentioned. You bring a transfer in, Damon Hazelton. He'll probably end up starting. Then you got Jalen Knox, who had a pretty good freshman year, but sort of disappeared last year. Now, again, you had a new quarterback with Kelly Bryant, who's not the greatest passer in the world. Plus, he was injured, which caused you to play 2 and 3 quarterbacks throughout the course of the season. So maybe a little bit expected there for him to take a step back. He's got to get back to where he was his freshman year as opposed to last year. That would really help you go a long way in improving that wide receiver core. And you're probably going to start as your 3rd wide receiver, a former walk-on. Not that there's never been a walk-on that's turned out to be great, but generally speaking, not a good idea in the SEC. Barrett Bannister, former walk-on wide receiver. He'll probably be your 3rd or 4th option at wide receiver. On your offensive line, you lose 3 of those starters from last year's offensive line. Now, heading into last year, it looked like Missouri's offensive line would be pretty good. One of the best 3 or 4 in the SEC. Like I mentioned, it didn't turn out that way, particularly in the last half of the season. Their offensive line played really, really bad. Got to have better play up front. It's true anywhere in college football, but particularly in the SEC, you got to have good play along the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. This offensive line is going to have to get a lot better in 2020 if they want to go bowling this year. Now, your top 8 offensive linemen average 6'6", 321 pounds. So you got some serious size to choose from along the offensive line, and you've got 5 or 6 guys that have some experience. You lose the 3 starters, so you return 2, but you got 5 or 6 that have, I don't know about significant playing time, but some playing time and experience to choose from to try to put together that 5-man starting front along the offensive line. But I think it's going to be a work in progress, maybe even like the quarterback position heading into the season. You may see a couple of different combinations of offensive lines in the first couple of weeks for Mizzou until they figure out sort of which 5 are working best. Let's take a look at the defense now for Missouri, see what they're working with in 2020. Now, as bad as the offense was last year, the defense actually played pretty well. Now, it's going to hurt losing that defensive tackle you had up front. He was one of, if not the best players you had on defense. He's gone. You also keep the defensive coordinator, which is a little unusual, but I think a good move here for Drinkwitz. You keep Ryan Walters. And like I mentioned, as bad as Missouri was on offense last year, their defense actually played pretty good. There is some talent and some pieces remaining from last year's team over there. And from a cohesiveness standpoint, especially considering all the changes you're going to have on the offensive side of the ball with Drinkwitz being an offensive-minded head coach, new quarterback, losing your top 3 wide receivers, offensive line up in the air, it's good to have at least some consistency somewhere, and you get that on the defensive side of the ball with keeping Ryan Walters. I think it's Jordan Elliott is that defensive tackle that you lose from last year. Not sure that you're going to be able to replace him, but now most everybody else on the defense returns, including your top 3 defensive ends from last year. So very experienced on the outside. That's the good news. The bad news, only 3 sacks combined last year from those 3 defensive ends. So Missouri's defense was pretty good, but if you were going to pick a weakness, it would definitely be the pass rush. Missouri's pass rush was pitiful last year, almost non-existent. You got to get better there. We're going to talk about the DBs in a minute. Now, the DBs played great, especially considering the fact you had no pass rush. That's got to get better. That's got to get better this year. That linebacker you had last year, was it Cale Garrett or Cole Garrett? This guy was amazing. First 4 or 5 games of the year, wasn't it? Then he went out with an injury. I think it was a pectoral thing. He had to sit out the rest of the year. He's gone. But when he got injured, you put this, is it Nick Bolton? I can't read my own right. I think it was Nick Bolton. Anyway, you put him in. He ended up being maybe even better. This guy was unbelievable. In fact, Pro Football Focus, if you know what it is, you know what it is. If you don't, I'm not going to try to explain it. It has to do with grading players by position as it relates to their NFL ability in the future, right? He was the highest graded Power 5 linebacker in America. In America. I want you to think about some of the linebackers at Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, all these teams that have amazing defenses. Think about some of these linebackers. This guy, Bolton from Missouri, was the highest rated by Pro Football Focus. That has to be a good thing. This guy's the real deal, and you get him back. So he'll be sort of the linchpin, the quarterback of your defense this year, with a half a year experience last year taking over for the injured guy that got the start. He's probably your best player on defense. Again, you've got to get better on the pass rush along the front. Now, let's look at your DBs. Now, I mentioned, Missouri's offense bad, but the defense had some bright spots. Listen to this. Missouri's defensive backfield led America last year with a 50.3% completion rate. 50.3. So they only allowed completions half the time the ball got put in the air. That's pretty good. 2 of the big reasons why, your 2 safeties. Your 2 safeties are definitely the stars of the defensive backfield. Now, you've got some holes you got to fill at cornerback on this year's team. You ran a lot of nickel and dime last year, so you got a lot of players with experience at the cornerback position, but you lose one of those guys. You got to replace that. I don't have really any questions about Missouri's defensive backfield. Again, is it going to be, are we about to start calling Mizzou DBU instead of LSU, Florida, or Ohio State? No, but the point is this is a really, really good defensive backfield. When you look at that 50.3 completion rate, and again, that led America, that tells you that your defensive backs are knocking down a lot of balls, defending and deflecting a lot of passes, and that's what you want. And that number is especially impressive, again, when you consider how poor Missouri was at rushing the quarterback up front, at pressuring the QB, at sacking him, that kind of thing. Quarterbacks had a lot of time to throw the ball when they played against Mizzou. It didn't always work out well because of this defensive backfield. All right, let's put the schedule up on the screen and see if we can tell what it gonna do. All right, here we go. Mizzou's 2020 football schedule. You start things off at home against Central Arkansas. Uncle Lou's never heard of this team. I'm gonna give you a win. I know you lost on the road last year to start things off against Wyoming. I just don't see that happening against Central Arkansas. If you lose this game week 1 at home, number 1, you can forget about making a bowl game. Number 2, you'll be the laughingstock, the embarrassment, and the joke, not only of the SEC, but of the Power 5. Kind of like Tennessee last year. Whoopity you! Yeah, don't make that mistake. Anyway, you start off 1-0. Week 2, you got your first conference game. You host SEC East opponent Vanderbilt. I talked about how poor your recruiting has been, 13th in the SEC almost every single year. There's a year or two where Arkansas was last. There's a year or two where Vanderbilt was last. I've got you beating Vanderbilt at home. This is not a gimme. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is not a gimme. This game really could go either way. I'm not high on Vanderbilt for obvious reasons, I think. I'm not high on you either, though. If this game was at Vandy, I may lean that direction. Vandy's not going to be a good team. They're going to win maybe one game within the SEC this year and a couple of non-con games. They're going to be a 3 or 4 win team. You've got to beat Vandy. If for any reason you don't start this season off 2-0, it's going to be an utter disappointment the rest of the way, and you won't be making a bowl game. You've got to win these first 2 if you've got any chance of making a bowl game, in my opinion. Week 3, things get a little bit tougher when you have to go on the road to South Carolina. Not a great team, but a team that's better than Missouri. You got to play them there. I think you catch a loss on the road in Columbia. Now, if for some reason Drinkwitz is able to work some sort of minor miracle with this offense in week 1, I think this could be an interesting game. In fact, there's a couple of games I've got you losing that I think could go the other way if Missouri's offense plays at a much higher level than it did last year, which remains to be seen. Again, questions at quarterback, brand new head coach, issues along the offensive line, so we'll see. But I've got you catching your first loss of the season in week 3 on the road against South Carolina. You're 2-1. Then you come back home for another non-con game against Eastern Michigan. This is another game that, unfortunately, I don't think is a guaranteed win for Missouri. That's how down I am, particularly on their talent top to bottom on the roster. I think you beat Eastern Michigan, but again, this is no guarantee. And you know, a lot of times people just assume that a Power 5 team or an SEC team is automatically going to beat anybody they play that's not a Power 5 team. You can go back and look over the last couple of years. There have been several SEC teams that have been beaten by non-Power 5 teams, including Missouri last year on the road at Wyoming. But I do think you get the win against Eastern Michigan. Now you have back-to-back road games here. Both of these are going to be tough. At Tennessee and at BYU, the Fred Flintstones of college football there. I think you lose on the road at Tennessee, and I think you lose on the road at BYU, and I get no pleasure in saying that. In fact, it pains me to say that. I usually predict BYU to go 0-12 every single year. I guess this year I'm going to have them at 1-11 because you're losing to BYU. All right, then you come back home for 2 straight home games before your bye week against Georgia and Kentucky. Georgia's going to beat you. They shut you out last year, 27 to nothing. You've had a very hard time against Georgia since you joined the SEC 7, 8, 9 years ago, whenever it was. In fact, I think you've beat Georgia once, maybe twice since joining the SEC. So you're 2-6, 1-7, something like that. I didn't look it up, but being a Georgia fan, I don't remember, but maybe once or twice that you beat Georgia since joining the SEC. That doesn't mean you can't beat them this year. It's at home. That'll help. Coming off back-to-back losses, though, probably a little demoralized when you look down and see your overall record at this point. And Georgia is a legitimate top 10 team. They may be top 5 by this point, depending on what happens in the Alabama game week 3. But I've got you losing at home to Georgia. Now, the Kentucky game has the potential to be a little bit more competitive. However, I'm higher on Kentucky this year, I think, than most people are. I don't think they're winning 10 games. I don't think they're winning the East. But I think they have a chance to beat everybody within the SEC East, except maybe Georgia and Florida, and that includes you. I think you catch a loss at home to Kentucky. 4 straight SEC losses, or 4 straight losses at Tennessee, at BYU, home to Georgia, home to Kentucky. I think you lose them all. That takes you into a much-needed bye week here. Things are really falling apart. You get a bye week at a pretty good time. But you come out of your bye week, and again, back-to-back road games. Back-to-back road games are never easy, no matter who the opponents are. Period. They're not. A road game is harder than a home game, every single time without exception. Back-to-back road games within your division, within the SEC, very, very hard. At Mississippi State, at Florida. Mississippi State, of course, another team with a brand new coaching staff this year. They bring Bigfoot in from Washington State. Mike Leach, another guy that's sort of an offensive mind. So Drinkwitz first, Leach. Who has the advantage? Well, if you look at the rosters and the talent available on each team, Mississippi State has the advantage. You got to play them there. How much cowbell? I don't know. Maybe none, which is a good time to remind you that when I'm doing these previews and predictions, I'm doing them based on a regular, normal season, like we always have. I realize that the odds of that happening are not very high, but I can't plan for every potential hypothetical as it relates to the coronavirus when I do these preview and prediction videos. So I'm assuming fans in the stands, every game played, that kind of thing, even though I know that's not going to be the case. It's just impossible to try to do a preview and prediction video based off of every potential hypothetical that could happen. So best case scenario for you, though, would be no fans at this game at Mississippi State. I'm not sure if you would win. Even if that was the case, I've got you losing on the road to Mississippi State, and I've got you losing on the road to Florida. Florida's another team out of the East that I think is a legitimate top 10 team, a possible top 5 team if they can get over the hump against Georgia and win another tough game or two, maybe against LSU. A potential division winner this year in Florida. We'll see. But I think you lose both of those. That's a 6-game losing streak you're on now, topping your 5-game losing streak from the year before. Now, your streaks last year, the 5 wins you had, and then the 5 losses you had immediately after that, were more a product of your schedule and how it laid out. If you look at the 5 teams you beat, they were 5 of the easiest teams on your schedule. You then played your most difficult teams in the back half of the schedule, and you lost them all. So I think you're losing 6 in a row here. You take an L on the road at the Swamp. Last 2 games of the year, home against the Louisiana Raging Cajuns and home against Arkansas. I got you winning both of those. As bad as Missouri appears to be, it doesn't compare to Arkansas. Again, Arkansas's got a first-year head coach in Sam Pittman, never been a head coach before, never even been a coordinator. And Arkansas is probably, right now, the worst or toughest coaching job in the entire SEC. If you just want to look at talent, they don't have much. They're on par maybe with a Vandy or a MIZZOU. But they're in the West, which generally is considered to be a little bit tougher of a division between the West and the East. And traditionally, Arkansas just hasn't been very good. Tough job for Sam Pittman out there at Arkansas. I think you win at home. I also think you beat Louisiana Raging Cajuns. That's the good news. You end things on a 2-game winning streak. Momentum for next year. A reason for the fans maybe to get a little bit more excited. That's the good news. Bad news, no bowling for MIZZOU. And again, that's with you winning a couple of what I think could be 50-50 games. I've got you beating Vandy. I don't think that's a guarantee, right? I've got you beating Eastern Michigan. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a guaranteed win either. So I gave you the benefit of the doubt, or at least I feel like I gave you the benefit of the doubt on some of these games. Now, is it possible you win some of these games that I have as losses? Maybe. Could South Carolina somehow be worse than they were last year, epically bad, historically bad, one of these 2-3 win seasons, and you find a way to get the job done on the road at South Carolina? I guess that's possible, although I got to be honest, I really don't see a way, just being honest. Kentucky, you know, in most years, yeah, I would give you a pretty good chance against Kentucky. But like I said, I happen to be higher on Kentucky this year than the average person is. And for that reason, I just can't pick you to, beat them. Mississippi State, maybe. I mean, you do get them after a bye week. A first-year head coach, I think a bye week is very important. It gives you time to sort of survey what went right, what went wrong the first half of the season. Gives maybe some injured or banged-up guys a time to rest, and you'll get 2 weeks to prepare to play this game at Mississippi State. It's just the fact that it's on the road makes it real tough for me to see you pulling the upset there. Florida, I don't think I need to explain that. I do think if a couple of things go right and you're able to pull off a couple of upsets, maybe you can get to 6-6. I don't see much better than that, no matter what happens. Anyway, good luck to Missouri this year, except when they play my Georgia Bulldogs. I have no hate for Missouri. I have no reason to. I do think Drinkwitz is a good coach and has some potential within the SEC. Again, look at what he did at App State in just 1 year last year, and go back and look at some of the teams he was a part of the offensive staff with Gus Malzahn, Auburn, Arkansas. I think he was at Boise State for a while too. Anyway, so he's got some potential as a head coach. Just not a lot of pieces, unfortunately, for him to work with this year at Missouri. That combined with a difficult SEC schedule. All right, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you again real soon. Have a good morning.